This is your lesson on exposure by Wilfred Owen. So let's get straight into it, shall we? Firstly, if you just have a look, if you've completed your Charge of the Light Brigade response, then please kind of pause now and have a go at responding to that feedback, making sure you make some really detailed improvements, just like we always do in the improvement time. All right then, so as you'll see at the start of the unit, we kind of put the poems into three different sections where they've all kind of got similar themes that makes it easier to kind of pick your comparisons. So we're moving on to the next lot, which is kind of all to do with kind of the power of nature versus the power of man. I thought we'd start with exposure because, I mean, we've done all the poems really that kind of deal with war in particular, and obviously this is going to link pretty well back to these ones, but also has some similar themes to more of the nature poems that we're going to look at throughout the next few lessons. So Wilfred Owen, there he is down here. He's one of the most famous war poets, really, but it's interesting to note that he didn't actually start writing about the war till 1917, and unfortunately, he died just before the end of the war the next year. And so, kind of before that, his poetry was kind of more about nature, and he took a lot of inspiration from the Romantic poets, which is something to keep in mind when we move on into that, and you'll get more information on those in the next few lessons. But yeah, so all of his kind of war poetry was done in 1 year, and he really focused on showing the horrors of war. So as you can see here, I mean, you pause this if you want to read this poem, but there were some poets, for example, Jesse Pope, who would kind of use poetry to make war sound great and noble, and to kind of get people into the spirit of things and get people signing up and things like that. And so Owen's poetry kind of responds to that and kind of shows the other side of war, because obviously people at home wouldn't actually know the full experience and just how horrible it was. So firstly, if you just read the poem on your own, it's a pretty long one, so we're going to try and get through it fairly quickly today. But just have a look at these questions on here, and do pause now and have a good go. It's really important you kind of form your own interpretations first before you start drawing on ideas from myself or kind of other sources or anything like that. So have a look through the poem. It's a difficult one, but see if you can come up with some understanding of that. So pause this now and have a go at these. Okay, so hopefully now you've watched, or you've kind of read the poem, and you can kind of see that even though it's based in the battlefield, there's no actual human enemy that these soldiers are fighting against. So they're fighting this losing battle against nature. So nature is the enemy here in this particular poem, and it really shows the realities of war. Okay, so that was said before, it's like a rejection of all this propaganda poetry that's kind of coming out and making war sound really good. So I mean, we can look at the title exposure a couple of ways. So obviously they're exposed to the elements, they're vulnerable, and they're dying because of these conditions that they have to keep going in. But also, I mean, you could flip it and look at the other way, where this is an exposure of what is happening. Okay, so again, just kind of showing the realities, exposing the realities of war, and how kind of awful these conditions are. And so we'll get straight into the poem, and like I say, there's so much you could analyze. We're not going to go through every single thing. You don't need to know every single word or phrase or come up with interpretations for that, because obviously in the exam, you're only going to, if you're doing it right and in detail, you're probably only going to be picking out 3 or 4 different things. So I'll just kind of quickly go through and give you a snapshot of the poem and what certain features could represent. So our brains ache in the merciless iced east winds that knife us. And so I think the first thing you can kind of think of, or you can really hear it when you speak it out loud, is this sibilance throughout this first line. So could it be representing the sound of the wind, perhaps? It's continuous. All right, so it just keeps coming and keeps coming and keeps coming, which I mean could emphasize this constant battle that these soldiers have got going on with the weather. Wearied, we keep awake because the night is silent. Low drooping flares confuse our memories of the salient. Worried by silence, sentries whisper, curious, nervous, but nothing happens. So I've picked that out there because it's we're kind of expecting something to happen, especially with this list: silence, sentries whisper, curious, nervous, and it's almost building up. And then we get this anticlimax in the last line, but nothing happens. I mean, that's kind of the whole point of this poem, really, is that nothing is happening. It's this boredom, this suffering that they're going through, and kind of nothing's changing that. It's almost like they're just stuck in this place waiting, and it's that waiting, that fear, that is kind of the real battle that they're facing psychologically. Watching, we hear the mad gusts tugging on the wire, like twitching agonies of men among its brambles. So we've got some really violent imagery here. And I suppose there's an ambiguous word choice of mad. So we've got the mad gusts of wind. So I mean, you could look at that as in mad, as in this is kind of crazy. Just how kind of much wind they've got coming towards them. But I mean, you've also got mad as in angry. And I mean, could we look at this as nature or God, as we'll see later, becoming angry at humans, at humanity, and almost the weather is kind of making humans suffer for the choices that they've made in terms of what the countries are making their people do. Northward incessantly the flickering gunnery rumbles, far off like a dull rumour of some other war. Okay, so they can hear the gunfire in a few miles away, kind of constantly reminding them where they are, what they're doing. And I think then it says, what are we doing here? And it almost comes back to that when we looked at bayonet charge, and the soldier's running, and he's kind of realizing what is the point of this. And we've got similar here. They're questioning what's going on and what is the point of all this. This is just inhumane. And so yeah, they're losing that faith, maybe that faith in God, in which we'll see in a little bit, or faith in their superiors who are giving the orders. It's all open to interpretation. So the poignant misery of dawn begins to grow. We only know war lasts, rain soaks and clouds sag stormy. I suppose that war lasts, and it's just kind of that reminder that this is never ending. Dawn massing in the east, her melancholy army. So we've got this personification here of the dawn, which usually we would kind of associate with a sunrise and hope or something like that. But actually, it's kind of getting together an army, which is the rain, the wind, and things like that. So it's a very bleak kind of image that we're getting. And the fact it attacks once more in ranks, on shivering ranks of grey. Again, this relentless kind of grey clouds, the rain and things like that just keeps coming. I suppose really what you could suggest is that we associate the grey with the uniforms the German soldiers wore, and so again, it's kind of pointing that this is a battle against nature. Nature is almost the enemy that they're fighting here, and I suppose the point is you can't fight nature. You are always going to lose against nature when it turns its back on you. Sudden successive flights of bullets streak the silence. Again, we've got more sibilance there, maybe emphasizing this continuous kind of pain, less deadly than the air that shudders black with snow. And again, we've got shuddering black with snow. We associate snow with a bright white colour. Actually, it's shuddering black with snow. We've got this contrast, which could emphasize that bleak outlook that they have on life now. With sidelong flowing flakes that flock, pause, and renew, we watch them wandering up and down the wind's nonchalance, but nothing happens. And again, we've got this 3 of the 4 last lines that we've seen so far of this, but nothing happens. So again, it's this anticipation, but it's not, nothing's happening. They're just constantly going through this struggle. Okay, into stanza 5. Pale flakes with finger in stealth come feeling for our faces. And this line kind of reminds me of something kind of creeping up, like a monster creeping up on them, slowly killing them, slowly kind of grabbing them and taking them to death. We cringe in holes back on forgotten dreams and stare, snow-dazed, deep into grassier ditches. So we drowse, sun-dozed, littered with blossoms trickling where the blackbird fusses. So hopefully you'll notice there's kind of a big flip in the nature that's being described. We've gone from this cold, kind of snowy, rainy kind of place, and now we're starting to see a difference in that. And I think that's the soldiers kind of going into a different place and reminding themselves what they used to do, a previous life that they're kind of reminiscing on. And so we go from snow dazed, which is obviously almost like the shock that they're in because of the cold, and they're not really capable of doing anything, to sun dozed, which is what we'd associate with maybe being quite, when you get quite tired or sleepy after being out in the sun, quite a nice image. So is this part kind of the soldiers almost hallucinating and imagining what it was like to be around the grass and the sun and the blossoms in their previous life before this war? And are they using this as like a coping mechanism? Slowly our ghosts drag home, glimpsing the sunk fires, glowed with crusted dark red jewels, crickets jingle there. So again, here, I think the slowly our ghosts drag home is kind of their spirits kind of leaving their body, going to a better place, of places where they knew, with the warmth. And so it's almost like their souls are leaving their bodies for a little bit. Or perhaps they'd rather be a ghost. Maybe slowly our ghosts drag home is that slowly each one of them are kind of dying and almost having that freedom, that they're liberated of the conditions that they've been in for so long. For hours the innocent mice rejoice, the house is theirs. So we can imagine these people who have left their homes to come and fight on the battlefields. The mice would be running around free, and be happy that humans are there. And so nature is rejoicing. It's almost like now humans are kind of taking care of each other and wiping each other out, that nature can almost get back to normal, and get rid of these unnatural things that humans have brought to the world. But I mean, it could also be metaphorical, not just actual mice, but I mean, it could be what we talked about earlier with people at home kind of celebrating and are quite upbeat. As it calling the people at home the innocent mice, and that they're kind of rejoicing, they're happy about how the war is going. The shutters and doors all closed, on us the doors are closed, we turn back to our dying. So it's quite casual. They've kind of had this little escapism where they take their minds elsewhere, and now it's, well, we'll get back on with our dying now. Since we believe not otherwise can kind fires burn, nor ever sun smile true on child or field or fruit, for God's invincible spring our love is made afraid. So he's almost saying here that they're afraid that spring will never come, that the new life is what we associate with spring, and yeah, they're afraid that that's not going to happen. They're not going to see a new spring, a new life, and I suppose this is just because they're all focused on when they're going to die. Therefore not lo, we lie out here, therefore we're born, for the love of God seems dying. It's almost like they're losing belief in God. If their love of God seems dying, it's like, how could a God allow such suffering to happen, such awful things? So I mean, we could see this line as the soldiers kind of losing belief in God, or alternatively, I mean, you could look at it as maybe God's love for humans is dying. So this could be like God turning his back on humans, and almost he's had enough of the madness that humans are causing. So we move into the last stanza. Tonight his frost will fasten on this mud and us, shriveling many hands, puckering foreheads crisp. The burying party, picks and shovels in the shaking grasp, pause over half-known faces. So I mean, we've got this image here of people having to take the dead soldiers and bury them. It says, all their eyes are ice. So I mean, again, is it imagery of the dead soldiers, or and the eyes they've just frozen over, and this awful image to kind of leave us with? Or is it kind of more metaphorical in the fact that the burying party, they're unaffected by this image now, that that it's just become normal that people are going to die and they're going to have to deal with them, and again, but nothing happens. So it leaves us with this question of what is the point in all of this? Okay, so I know we kind of rushed through that, we've got through that quickly, but hopefully we kind of understand the poem now. We understand where Owen's coming from and his message, and kind of what he's saying, this difference between humans and nature. And yeah, hopefully we can kind of pick out some techniques as well in which he's emphasized that. So make sure you've kind of made your own annotations, or use some of mine as well, so you've got some notes to take back to when we get back into the classroom. And just a quick note on structure then. We see it was quite a strict scheme. We've got all of the stanzas kind of follow the same pattern. Again, I suppose we could say something along the lines of each day that these soldiers kind of go through is the same. This kind of repetition of this kind of mundane situation that they're in. And if you notice, I've said it's a rhyme scheme. We see in these lines here that we call this para rhyme. So it's almost a rhyme, but it's not quite. We've got similar consonant sounds, silent and salient, but the vowels are quite different here. So using this power rhyme, silent, salient, brambles, rumbles, stormy, army. Okay, snow, renew. So yeah, it's not this perfect rhyme that we're probably used to seeing in poetry. So again, could we be saying it's quite unnatural? It shows how unnatural war is, or something along those lines. And again, we've got this repetition of the short last line, kind of reinforcing the constant weight and suffering that these soldiers are going through. So I'm going to leave it there, really, and just with these tests for you to do. So like I say, it was a long poem. I've kind of rushed through it. There's loads more to it, so it'd be good for you to kind of have a Google and really get your heads around this poem. But pause here at the end, have a go at these tasks, and send them over when you can. Enjoy the rest of your day.